The first thing you notice in a snowstorm like that is the silence. It is not peaceful. It's suffocating. The kind of quiet that presses against your chest, making every breath feel heavier. That night, as the blizzard howled around my cabin, I could swear I heard something else beneath the wind. A faint voice. A cry, maybe. I told myself it was my imagination, the wind playing tricks on me. But deep down I knew better. There is something about being so far away from everything, surrounded by endless snow, that messes with your mind. You see things, you hear things, but what I experienced that winter, it wasn't in my head. I remember it started with small things. Things I brushed off at first. The sound of footsteps crunching in the snow when no one should have been out there. A shadow that flickered across the edge of the tree line. And then, one morning, I woke up to find the words "Don't look outside" written on the frost of my bedroom window. The cabin was old, creaky, drafty, with a history nobody cared to tell me when I bought it. But the thing about old places is they don't just keep memories. They keep secrets. That night, as the storm raged and the power flickered, I heard it again. Clearer this time. A child's voice. Soft but unmistakable. It was coming from the woods, barely audible over the wind. I don't know why I opened the door. Maybe it was instinct, or maybe it was something else pulling me out into the cold. The snow was falling so hard I could barely see a few feet ahead, but the voice was closer now. And then I saw them. Footprints in the snow. Small ones like a child's, leading from the edge of the woods straight toward my cabin. I froze. My blood ran colder than the storm around me. You see, I had been out earlier that day, and the fresh snowfall had covered every trace of my own tracks. These footprints hadn't been there before. It was then I realized something was wrong. Terribly wrong. Because as I looked closer, I noticed the prints didn't stop at my porch. They went right up to my bedroom window. And then vanished. I never should have gone to that cabin. If I'd known what I would find there. What would find me? I would have turned around and never looked back. But by the time I understood, it was already too late. And now all I can do is tell you this story. Maybe then it won't happen to someone else. It was the kind of winter that bites into your bones, relentless and unforgiving. After the divorce, I needed to get away. Far away. The cabin was supposed to be my sanctuary, hidden deep in the mountains, where the only sounds were the crunch of snow beneath my boots and the wind weaving through the trees. It wasn't much. A little run down with a fireplace that barely worked and windows that groaned under the weight of the storm. But it was mine. The first night, I noticed something strange. A faint sound, like a tapping coming from outside. I told myself it was just branches brushing against the cabin. But when I checked the next morning, there were no branches near the walls. Just smooth snow, unbroken except for a single set of footprints leading up to the porch. I stood there for what felt like hours staring at those prints. They weren't mine. I had not been out since the storm started. But the strangest thing was how they ended. Abruptly, as if whoever or whatever made them had simply vanished. The days that followed didn't bring any comfort. The power flickered constantly, plunging the cabin into near darkness. The wind would rattle the windows at odd hours, like impatient fingers drumming to get in. And at night, I started hearing noises. Low, guttural sounds that didn't belong to any animal I knew. I tried to brush it off as my nerves, maybe the stress of everything catching up to me. But then the little things started piling up. A photo frame on the mantel fell, shattering on the floor, even though no one had touched it. The door to the cellar swung open on its own one morning, revealing a staircase I had been too afraid to explore. And then there was the frost. It started appearing in strange patterns on the windows, forming shapes that looked almost deliberate. Like someone or something was trying to leave a message. At first, it was just smudges. But then I saw it. Words clear as day. Don't stay. By then I was starting to feel like I was not alone in the cabin. There was a weight in the air, a heaviness I couldn't explain. Even during the day, when the storm let up enough for the light to seep through the trees, there was this overwhelming sense of dread, like something was watching me from the shadows of the forest. It wasn't long before I discovered something I was not supposed to. I had been trying to distract myself from the unease. Cleaning, organizing, anything to keep my mind busy. That's when I found it, tucked away in the bottom drawer of an old wooden desk in the corner of the cabin. A journal. Its leather cover was cracked with age, and the pages inside smelled faintly of mildew and smoke. At first, it seemed unremarkable. Scribbled entries about snowfall hunting trips, and recipes for preserving food. But the further I read, the darker it became. The journal belonged to a man who had lived in the cabin decades ago with his wife and 2 children. He wrote of strange events, the kind that start small but grow until they are impossible to ignore. The snow seems heavier this year, one entry read. I keep hearing whispers outside even when the wind dies down. The children say they've seen someone in the woods. A tall figure watching the house from the shadows. Another entry described the children waking up screaming, saying someone was tapping on their windows. But the most chilling entry was his last. The storm has cut us off completely. We haven't seen another soul in weeks. The whispers are louder now, and the children keep talking about the man in the snow. Last night, I saw him too, standing just beyond the tree line. I think he wants us to leave. But it is too late for that. I sat there for hours, reading and rereading the journal, the words sinking into me like the cold. And then, as if on cue, I heard it again. A sound I couldn't ignore. It was faint at first, like someone dragging their hand across the outside of the cabin. Then came the scratching. Slow, deliberate, and just loud enough to make my skin crawl. I didn't sleep that night. How could I? Every sound felt amplified in the silence. When I finally drifted off near dawn, it was to the sound of faint laughter. A child's laughter carried by the wind. It was so clear I swore it came from inside the cabin. Over the next few days things only got worse. Items in the cabin began moving on their own. My boots, left by the door, would end up in the kitchen. A chair at the dining table would be pulled out when I knew I'd left it tucked in. At first, I thought I was losing track of things, but the changes became impossible to ignore. One morning, I woke to find scratches on the windows. Long, jagged lines like someone or something had dragged their nails across the glass. They were on every window, no matter how high or small. And no matter how many storms passed, they never faded. The final straw came one night when I heard the sound of footsteps on the roof. Slow, deliberate steps, as though someone was pacing just above me. I froze in my bed, holding my breath, hoping it was just my imagination. But then I heard it again. Lighter steps like those of a child running across the ceiling. I couldn't take it anymore. Grabbing a flashlight, I threw on my coat and stepped outside, determined to prove to myself that I was imagining things. But when I looked up at the roof, it was empty. Just a blanket of undisturbed snow. No footprints, no sign of anyone. And yet, as I turned to go back inside, I saw it. In the snow, just beyond the edge of the porch, were two sets of footprints. One large, one small, both leading straight into the woods. It was on the third week when I found it. The well. I had ventured farther from the cabin than I normally dared, desperate for some sense of normalcy. The snow was waist deep in some places, and the air was sharp, biting at my lungs with every breath. That's when I saw it. A circular mound of stones, barely visible beneath the snow, hidden among the pines. As I brushed the snow away, a sinking feeling settled in my chest. The stones were ancient, weathered by time, and the well's opening was pitch black, wide enough to swallow anything or anyone. I leaned closer, trying to see how deep it went, but the darkness seemed endless. And then I heard it. At first, I thought it was just the wind. A faint, hollow sound echoing up from the depths. But as I listened, the sound grew clearer. Whispers, soft, indistinct voices like a crowd murmuring just out of earshot. I stumbled back, my heart pounding, convinced it was just my imagination. But as I turned to leave, I noticed something chilling. The snow around the well was disturbed, as though someone or something had been circling it recently. After that, everything started to unravel. I couldn't sleep. Not with the whispers and the nightmares. Every time I closed my eyes, I dreamed of hands. Cold, pale hands reaching out from the snow, clawing at me, dragging me down into the frozen ground. Worse still were the things I found in the cabin. One morning, I woke to see something drawn in the frost on the living room window. It was a child's drawing. Crude, simple. A stick figure standing beside a smaller one, both surrounded by jagged shapes that looked like trees. At first, I thought it was condensation from my breath, but as I touched the glass, I realized it wasn't on the surface. The drawing was inside the frost, etched so deeply it could not be wiped away. Every night, the knocking began. It started as a faint tapping on the front door, growing louder and more insistent as the hours dragged on. I would throw open the door, flashlight in hand, only to find nothing but the swirling snow. One night I thought I caught a glimpse of something. A shadow darting between the trees, too fast to be human. But when I followed the footprints it left behind, they led me straight back to the well. It was on one of those nights, during the worst of the storm, that I finally decided to follow the footprints farther than I ever had before. I wrapped myself in every layer I could find, grabbed my flashlight, and stepped into the freezing night. The tracks were small like a child's, weaving through the trees in a chaotic pattern. The deeper I went into the woods, the heavier the snow fell until I could barely see a few feet ahead of me. Just as I was about to turn back, the beam of my flashlight caught something glinting beneath the ice. It was a toy. A small wooden horse half buried in the snow, its paint faded and chipped. Beside it I saw more. A tattered scarf, a broken picture frame, and what looked like a child smitten. My breath caught as I realized these were not just random objects. They belonged to the family from the journal. I wanted to run, to leave it all behind, but something kept me rooted in place. And then I heard it. A voice, so faint I almost missed it. A child's voice calling my name. My blood turned to ice. How did it know my name? The storm was unlike anything I had ever experienced. The wind roared like a living thing, rattling the cabin's walls and drowning out every other sound. Snow whipped against the windows, thick and blinding, as if the world itself had vanished. I had locked every door, every window, and yet I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't alone. Then I saw it. Through the frosted glass of the living room window, a dim light flickered in the distance. It was small and unsteady, like the flame of a lantern swaying with the wind. My heart raced as I stepped closer, wiping the frost away to see more clearly. The light was coming from the direction of the well. Against my better judgment, I grabbed my coat and flashlight, convinced I had to see for myself. The storm pushed against me as I trudged through the snow, each step heavier than the last. As I approached the well, the lantern's glow became clearer, illuminating a figure standing in the snow. It was a woman. She was pale, almost translucent, her long black hair whipping around her face in the wind. She wore a tattered dress that fluttered like smoke, and in her hand she held the lantern. For a moment I thought she had not noticed me, but then she turned her head, her hollow eyes locking onto mine. "You shouldn't be here," she whispered, her voice carried on the wind, barely audible but cutting through me like a knife. I tried to back away, but the snow seemed to hold me in place. Her gaze was unrelenting, her sorrow palpable, and yet there was something else. Something darker. "They called to you, didn't they?" she said, stepping closer. "They always call." Panic surged through me, and I turned to run, but before I could take a single step, I felt a cold, unyielding grip around my ankle. I looked down to see pale hands clawing up from the snow, their fingers skeletal and relentless. I screamed, kicking and thrashing, but more hands emerged, pulling me down inch by inch. The woman stepped closer, her expression twisted with sorrow and guilt. "I tried to stop it," she said, her voice trembling. "I tried to save them, but it's too strong. Once it takes hold, it never let go." I fought harder, clawing at the ground, but the hands kept pulling, dragging me closer to the well. The woman raised her lantern, illuminating the darkness, and for the first time, I saw what was inside. It was not just a well. It was a void, an endless, writhing darkness that seemed alive. Shadows twisted and shifted within, and from its depths came a chorus of voices. Whispers, screams, and laughter, all mingling into a cacophony of madness. The cold emanating from it was unbearable, sinking into my bones and freezing me from the inside out. "You must leave," the woman pleaded, though her face was resigned. "But it won't let you go unless it takes something in return." I realized then that she was not just a victim. She was its servant, cursed to guard the well and ensure it was never left wanting. She had been the mother from the journal, the one who vanished with her family. And now she was bound to this place, an eternal sentinel for something far beyond human comprehension. In a final act of desperation, I grabbed the lantern from her hands and swung it toward the well. The glass shattered and flames licked at the edge of the darkness. For a brief moment, the hands released me, retreating into the void, and the whispers turned to screams. But it wasn't over. As the fire dimmed, the woman stepped closer, her expression filled with sorrow. "Run," she whispered, her voice breaking. "Run and never look back." I did not need to be told twice. I stumbled to my feet, barely able to keep my balance, and ran as fast as I could through the storm. Behind me, I could hear the well's voices growing louder, their anger rising like a tide, but I didn't dare stop. I didn't dare look back. I do not remember much of the journey back to the car. The storm swallowed everything. My tracks, the cabin, and the distant glow of the cursed lantern. My legs were numb, my lungs burned with every breath, and yet I pushed forward, driven by nothing but raw survival. When I finally reached the vehicle, it was half buried in snow. My hands shook so violently that it took me several tries to unlock the door and start the engine. The heater sputtered to life, but the chill inside me did not leave. As I sped down the mountain road, I kept glancing in the rearview mirror, half expecting to see her standing in the middle of the road, lantern in hand. I never went back for my things. Everything I owned was left behind in that cabin. Even now, years later, I sometimes wonder if it's still there untouched, or if the snow has swallowed it whole like it swallows everything else. But what haunts me the most isn't what happened that night. It is what didn't. In the weeks that followed, I tried to find records of the cabin, of the family mentioned in the journal. Nothing came up. No missing persons reports, no property records. Nothing. It was as if the cabin, and everything connected to it, had never existed. To this day, I cannot explain what I saw or how I escaped. I tell myself it was a nightmare brought on by isolation and the unforgiving cold. But deep down I know the truth. I can still feel the weight of those hands pulling me toward the well. I can still hear the whispers when the wind howls at night. And in my dreams I see her. The woman with the lantern standing in the snow, watching, waiting. The cabin did not stay empty for long. A new family moved in the following winter. They did not last a month. When the rescue team arrived, all they found was a snow-covered car in the driveway and a single handprint burned into the frost of the cabin window. What happened to them I can say. But I do know this. Whatever is out there in the cold and the dark is still waiting. Still hungry. What would you have done in my place? Could you have survived the storm, or would you have fallen victim to the whispers in the snow? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. And if chilling tales like this keep you on edge, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the bell icon. I have many more stories to share. Stories that will keep you up at night wondering what's hiding just beyond the shadows. Remember, the shadows are never far behind.